Might there be a way in which ME-CFS can actually lead to scar tissue or fibrosis in the lungs? Now, this is not a question that has been researched, and so what I'm saying in today's video is very speculative and very theoretical and might frankly be completely wrong. But there is nevertheless a rationale for why ME-CFS could lead to fibrosis. So by that I mean unifying model of ME-CFS from Wirth and Scheibenbogen, a model that I often talk about on this channel. There are mechanisms which could potentially explain why this fibrosis could occur. I have also had the opportunity to email Professor Wirth about this, and he has shared his thoughts, which I will talk about in today's video. And finally, from my own personal experience, I've had 2 x-rays of my lungs this year, and both of them showed that I have subtle but pervasive fibrosis in my lungs. Now, I'll be sharing those images with you in today's video. Basically, this is just sort of chucking it out there that there might be a way in which ME-CFS can lead to this. I'd be very curious to hear if you've had a lung x-ray and what did it show, or if you have noticed as an ME-CFS patient, whether you've also developed some issues with your lungs, even if you haven't had an x-ray yet. And yeah, just to kind of put it out there and see what the response is. As I say, this is a very speculative video, so please take it with a pinch of salt. Nevertheless, I hope you find it interesting. Before we get to that, my name is Patrick Usher, and I'm author of the book Understanding ME-CFS and Strategies for Healing, in which I break down some of the latest, most exciting research into ME-CFS and long COVID, as well as talking about the various treatment strategies that I have tried in order to improve my own quality of life as an ME-CFS patient. The links for that book, as well as to a free sample, are down below in the description box. Okay, so first things first, I'm going to show you shortly the x-rays of my lungs, and I'm going to point out to you the fibrosis that was found in them. So again, fibrosis is scar tissue. It will impact the functionality of the lungs to some extent. It's very curious on the face of it that I should have this problem. I have never smoked. I have never had a terrible chest infection, which would kind of be the normal reasons by which someone might develop a problem like this. So on the face of it, this kind of presents a puzzle. Why has this actually happened in my case? So before we get to some explanations, let me now just show you the x-rays and speak to them for a little bit. I actually had 2 x-rays of my lungs done in the last year. The first, which is this one, was at the beginning of March, prior to my 60 sessions of medical grade hyperbaric oxygen. And this was done by a clinic out here in Romania. And basically I went to the, when I talked to the people at the clinic about it, they said, "Did you know that you have fibrosis in your lungs?" And I said, "No, I had no idea." And they sat down and talked me through this image, and they said, "You see all of these kind of white streaks that are going throughout the lungs, that's all fibrosis, that's scar tissue." They said, it's not like you've got the fibrosis that you would see from someone who, had cystic fibrosis, or who, had a terrible COVID infection, because in that case, the whole parts of the lungs would go white on an x-ray. But basically, they compared it to the lungs of a smoker. They said, you're about 20% under your functionality, because of these fibrotic streaks. And I then got a follow-up x-ray done after all the hyperbaric, which was here from the end of July. And, I'd originally hoped that when I got this x-ray done, that my video about this would be, this is what 60 sessions of hyperbaric did to my lungs, and we'd be able to see that all the fibrosis had gone. But as you can see, that is not the case. It is somewhat better if you study it very closely from the first one, but basically the kind of scar tissue is still there. So the question then becomes, what might explain this, especially for someone like me, who's never smoked, never had a terrible chest infection? What's actually going on? Alright, so now you've seen the nature of the problem, and before I get to what might be potentially explaining this, I want to just preface it by saying that my lungs have not felt right over the course of my illness. They have felt somehow congested or stuffed or not kind of soft and smooth and happy like they would have been when I was younger. Now, after my hyperbaric oxygen treatment from this year, my 60 sessions, I have to say that my lungs do feel somewhat better, even though the x-rays have not kind of shown too much of an objective change. Nevertheless, they do feel better. But in general, it's not been great, the situation with my lungs over the course of the illness. And one thing in particular, which I think is crucial potentially to this, is that I have often had fluid in my lungs. Now, it's not hard to know if you have fluid in your lungs because you literally feel like you have fluid in your lungs. It is, your lungs become wet, you can feel the moisture in there, it's not very pleasant, and particularly going back like 2 or 3 years when I would be in a bad crash, and at night, if I kind of did a forceful exhale, I would just feel this kind of fluid in my lungs moving around a bit. It's quite disconcerting. This is just a short word to say that this video is sponsored by Normalite. Normalite is something that I have been using for the last 3 years. And it is hands down the most effective supplement that I have found to help me with my ME-CFS. It is a form of oral rehydration solution designed specifically for ME-CFS and POTS patients. One study showed that if you drink a litre of ORS, you can boost your blood volume as effectively as a saline IV. I am someone who still struggles with low blood volume, and Normalite for me is an indispensable way for me to feel a lot better every day and to be more functional and to have more of a life. So please check out the links down below in the description box to get your own packets of Normalite. Now, it's my suspicion at this stage that the reason for my scar tissue in the lungs has actually been the result of chronic build-up within them. And I think that this chronic fluid build-up might be coming from 2 kind of interrelated causes. So the first, which is from the Wirth and Scheibenbogen model, stems from microvascular leakage. Now, within that model, without getting too complicated, there is this capacity for the body to produce certain molecules in excess, are kind of sent out all over the body during certain episodes, which when they reach the blood vessels in different parts of the body are actually powerful enough and damaging enough to open the blood vessels up and cause leaks. And from those leaks, fluid will then seep out. Wirth and Scheibenbogen talk about this in their unifying model hypothesis paper in this table here, table 5, ME-CFS symptoms potentially explained by spillover of hyperalgesic vasodilators into the circulation. So these are the molecules I'm talking about. Very complicated. If I went into exactly why it's all happening, I'd be talking for 10 minutes. But let's just take their word on it for the purposes of this video. What they say is that when these spillover molecules reach the lungs, the bronchi may be narrowed by airway edema, dysfunctional beta-2 adrenergic receptors, and spasmogenic action of bradykinin and prostaglandins. So what that means is that these spillover molecules, which are particularly produced during PEM, they're kind of initially meant to help with muscular blood flow, but they kind of leave the muscles and they go all over the body causing havoc. I said I wouldn't go into explaining it, but that's the nutshell of it. And they reach the lungs and they may, in fact, cause this narrowing of the bronchi in the lungs, which then can lead to edema or the build-up of fluid. So there is a potential direct mechanism by which you could have a fluid accumulation in the lungs. The second possible reason is simply the very slow lymphatic system situation that occurs in ME-CFS. Lymphatic system being our second circulatory system, which often just slows down and can potentially even reverse its flow altogether if we follow the work of Dr. Raymond Perrin. Even, again, in talking to Professor Klaus Wirth about this, in his model too, although I don't think he's written about it, but he recognises that in his model too, there are mechanisms by which the lymphatic system can slow down, and you're not getting this kind of efficient return of lymphatic fluid into the active circulation. But the key point is that when the lymphatic system slows down, the fluid can back up and actually go into the lungs. So we therefore have two reasons you could get this build-up of fluid in the lungs. Now, when I got my x-rays recently, I wrote to Professor Wirth and I asked him, can we think of any ways in which ME-CFS could lead to lung fibrosis? And his response was that it's most likely coming about because of the chronic build-up of fluid in the lungs. So in other words, if it was just there for a little bit, that would be one thing. But if the fluid is there more often, kind of congesting the lungs, the persistence of the fluid is actually what causes the scar tissue and the fibrosis. And I think that, hypothetically, that makes good sense. It makes sense of the situation. It makes sense of my particular picture with this because, it's not like the classic fibrosis you'd see from smoking or a chest infection. Although it's pervasive, it's subtle and it's kind of all around, which is sort of what you'd expect from a situation where you have this kind of systemic build-up of fluid here and there in the lungs. It wouldn't really cause major damage, but it would cause some kind of damage. That is something that I think likely makes sense, and it also ties in with my experience of having osteopathic treatment, lymphatic drainage treatment, because when I have those treatments done to me, one of the things that happens afterwards is I often have these kind of wet coughs. And when you mobilize the lymphatic fluid and you're kind of able to get some out of the lungs, you will partly expel this by coughing. And so the cough will become wet because you're actually removing some of the fluid from the lungs. And so my experience has been that with treatments that actually mobilize lymphatic fluid, like osteopathy, like pressotherapy, wet coughs after the treatment, which suggests that there is this chronic build-up of fluid there. Now, I do think this has got better. If I think back to 2 or 3 years ago, some of the symptoms I had in terms of fluid in my lungs were quite strong, and I was actually quite worried and wondered if I should go and do something about it. But these days it's more subtle, even though it's often still perceptible. So there you have it. That's why I think theoretically ME-CFS might lead a build-up of scar tissue in the lungs, which of course would then only further aggravate the illness because that's not going to help with oxygenating the body and exercise capacity, even though it won't be, if it's at the kind of level I have it won't be like a deal breaker, but it will further cause some issues on that front. And, I don't know whether this would be kind of a permanent fixture, even if you got better. I know that people say, with lung fibrosis in general, the scar tissue kind of remains. I haven't seen people talk about it improving. I had high hopes the hyperbaric oxygen would remove the scar tissue. The doctors in the clinic told me that it should, but as you saw, it didn't really make any impact. So it's possible that I'll have this always, even if I recover. Or perhaps, if I get better and I'm able to take exercise again, maybe my body will work it out. So that's kind of an open question. But for now, I just wanted to put this out there. I wanted to hear what people think of this. I want to know if you have had issues with fluid in your lungs. Have you felt that? Have you noticed after lymphatic treatments that you have these wet coughs? Have you had x-rays of your lungs that show some kind of fibrosis? Please leave your thoughts and experiences down below in the comments. So I will look forward to engaging with you there. That's it for this video. Please check out my website, patrickusher.com, for consultations, also for my newly launched Patreon and Discord community, which is a supportive treatment and research-focused community where people are sharing their tips and tricks and strategies for moving forward. There's also options to submit questions for Q&A videos that I'm doing or guest speakers that are upcoming, as well as to take part in a once-a-month Zoom call where we'll all be sharing in a focused way the kind of treatments that we're currently working on or that we're interested in to try and help us move forward as a community. It's only €5.50 or $7 a month, and you can find more information about it down below in the description box. That's it for this video. I will see you in the next one.